So this talk, I don't know if anyone's been to see one of my talks before. I realise this is my 5th year of doing doing either Scottish Ruby Conference or Scotland on Rails. People in my work, I do security talks. This is no different. I got the idea for this talk around the turn of the year when there was obviously there was a spate of security bugs in Rails. And there was a lot of people you could see were quite concerned about what do you do about this. It's not always easy to deploy patches to running applications. And I had this kind of thought, maybe do a talk around what you can do to maybe make things less bad for yourself, to improve your overall security, to not rely on one control too much. And so it started out being called your framework is going to fail you, and probably you could replace the word framework with $security control. So things will go wrong. And this is a talk about how to make that less bad. So start off with what this talk is not about. This talk isn't about the details of the security flaws themselves. There's been a lot of good analysis about those, and some of them were actually really quite interesting. So if you're interested in how exactly things can go really horribly wrong when they don't look like they should be able to, then there was some good analysis by the guys who found this stuff. But what this talk is about, it's talking about what threats you might face. So how are things going wrong at the moment? What are people seeing? What am I seeing when I do security work? Practical ways you can improve things. And a bit about defense in depth. Now, defense in depth is kind of a hoary old security truism, but I want to talk about how you can actually make that kind of real for yourself and where it might be applicable. So the obviously about me slide. I've been doing IT information security for some years. I used to have a number in there, but it got a bit depressing, so I took it out. So now it's just some. I'm a director at a company called Scott STS. My partner in crime is sat in the front. And I'm the OWASP Scotland chapter leader. Out of curiosity, I should always do the show of hands. Heard of OWASP? Okay, cool. That's getting better, I think, progressively. One of the things I was going to say is I've been doing OWASP stuff for a while now. If you use OWASP materials, but there are things you don't like about them, please tell me. I'm happy to feed this stuff back into people who do it. OWASP is fundamentally most people who do it are security people, not developers, even though it's for developers. So sometimes I kind of feel maybe the material isn't well targeted, so I'd be interested to hear any kind of feedback on that. But anyway, on to the talk. Why is your framework going to fail you? What is going to cause this to be a problem for you? The first thing, it's not OWASP. That's the OWASP logo. It's not OWASP. It's what's on the OWASP logo, which is bugs. Security bugs are inevitable, right? So we've seen various talks about this. It's been mentioned in talks already today. If you write code, there will be bugs. Some of the bugs will be security bugs. Okay, so that's so far, so what's different? What's different these days is there's now a market for bugs. Bugs are a commercial quantity that are bought and sold for a variety of reasons. So you see Google, you see Facebook, they will offer you money. You find a security bug on a Google page, you get paid for it. They'll give you money for it. So that's the good side of it. That's great, because that's the vendor gets to know about it. It gets fixed, and everyone's happy. The less good side of it is that there are black hats who will pay money for security bugs. And there are everything from the white all the way down to the black and shades of grey in between. Everything from governments who will pay for it. If you've seen this kind of concept of a cyber weapon, so you see this I hate the massive overuse of the word cyber. Everything in security has to be cyber something. So they'll say cyber weapon. All that is a bug, a zero-day bug, plus some malware to deploy it. So it's just bugs in code, and now you can get money for them. So the thing is, if money is available to find security bugs, you can bet your bottom dollar more of them will be found. Right? People are motivated by money. So you can only bet there are going to be more security bugs as time goes by. Absolutely. So that's a problem, and that's why security controls will fail. And the other reason is I called it the expectations gap. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is the idea that people expect software to do things for them. So that you might expect your framework, for example, you might expect Rails to do HTML encoding. So all my output is HTML encoded, therefore I don't have to worry about cross-site scripting. Yeah, but that doesn't always hold. So say I'm putting my data out into JSON, and then I'm reading it in and then evaluating it in HTML. You might still have cross-site scripting. So there's a big gap sometimes between what the framework or what the software developers think they're producing and what people actually use it for. So it might not be a bug, it might be something like that. And the other thing is you might expect that users will always do things sensibly or people will always work sensibly, and that obviously is going to fail. I mean, everyone knows that users do stupid things. So expectation gaps is the other reason why these things fail. So why does it matter? See, here's the thing. Ultimately, software bugs don't matter if no one exploits them. An unexploited software bug for security stuff anyway, it doesn't really matter. Because you'll find that security bugs, a program can run entirely properly, it can do its intended function without any problem at all, it can still have a serious security bug in it. And if no one exploits that, it's fine. Unfortunately, I would suggest the internet is a really dangerous place. I've talked a little bit about this. I've talked about this kind of interesting stuff at the moment. Random noise, what I call random noise is stuff. If you have something on the internet, you put it out there on an external network, not even maybe even a large internal network. You know, some of these networks where very large organizations have them, I'd argue are probably hostile to some extent or another. You have to expect random scanning. So people will try and break in. And that could be anything from really dumb, you know, I'm trying to find phpMyAdmin. So if you run a web server and you look at the logs, you'll see requests for phpMyAdmin because people know you can break into it, and if you break into it, you can compromise the server. So you're always going to get that. But some of these guys are actually getting quite intelligent. So when there's a zero-day bug now, you'll see random noise of a scanner for that. So and that gets commercialized quite quickly. Who else might do it? Financial attackers. As I said, there's money to be made in bugs, and anywhere there is money to be made, criminals turn up because they can make money. There's a really good example, if anyone saw it this week, there was some guys who did a heist on prepaid Visa card companies, got 25 million in 24 hours. And they did that by hacking into the system that had handled the cards, and then artificially draining and reboosting the limits while having people stand at cash machines with cards with those numbers on them. And you think, well, that's really great, what a novel attack, except they've been doing it for 4 years. You know, that same hack happened to RBS WorldPay in 2009. So this is absolutely not a new attack. But criminals are quite good at, once they worked out something works, they'll keep doing it. So you have to expect, if your software has anything to do with money, people will come after it. And the other one, if you've seen this in the press, they'll call it cyber espionage. But it's just espionage. If your software is something anyone might find interesting, so say your software holds contract information, then someone might hack into that because they want to get an advantage in a contract negotiation. You're actually seeing this. You're seeing firms of advisors or firms who supply software to other industries are getting hacked into because that's a good way, an easy, like a low security way to get access to systems. And that's becoming, again, more common. So if your software handles stuff that people might find interesting or that people might gain benefit from hacking into, that's going to happen. And the last one, so anonymous is the canonical example of this, or usually gets used, but it's not always anonymous. I'm guessing people saw the Linode hack. It got a lot of press. If you're interested in finding out more about it, there's some guys who put out this zine. It's a hacker group. They called Hack the Planet. And they put out a zine describing, they said they did it, and it seems fairly likely they did do it. And it describes why it was they did it. And the funny thing was, they did it to take out an IRC server because they wanted to get back at some other people who they didn't like. It had nothing to do with Linode. Not only did they take out Linode and got root access to the servers running on Linode, which had a variety of software, including things like Nmap, security scanner. They had access to that. They also took out their DNS provider. They took out name.com. So you've seen name.com announced a breach, I think it was a couple of days ago. So these guys took out, I think they took out 2 or 3 name providers and Linode just to get access to someone's IRC server. That's, that's slightly concerning that they were able to pull that off. And if you read their zine, it has some other really interesting things, like they reckon they had access to the root name servers. I might be a little bit worried about the fact they've got access to the root name servers. And the reason they did it, their idea behind it, was they didn't want the DNS provider, but what they wanted to do was put a transparent proxy down so they could intercept any traffic targeted for the domain. So your systems could be entirely secure, but if your DNS provider gets hacked, someone just redirects traffic for your host to them and then passes it back on to you. You might not even know you've been hacked. So hacktivists are out there, and some of them are quite clever. So what can we do about this? So we've said there are more bugs. There are always going to be more bugs. And there are people out there who want to try and hack into us. So we obviously need to try and react to this. I think people need to change the way they do security. That's why I'm up here. So this looks a bit dodgy, and I got the image credit, and it's from Psychedelia. It's meant to be a Smartie. So the idea is, for people in the UK will know what Smartie is. If you're not in the UK, it's like an M&M, I suppose, with the kind of international equivalent. People's security, I always describe it as the warm Smartie effect. So it's got this lovely hard outer shell, but once you get past the hard outer shell, it's all soft and gooey on the inside. And most environments I see when I do security testing are kind of like that. So you've got this nice hard outer shell, things have been hardened from the internet, and if you get past that, then it's all over. And here's the unsurprising thing, is attackers have worked that out, and they've got a variety of interesting ways of bypassing the external bit. Where do you need to go? Where I think companies, depending on your kind of what you do for a living, where they need to go is far more something like this. So individual systems stand alone. You're not exposing everything. So if I compromise this little bit here, it doesn't automatically mean that I can get everywhere. I then have to try and compromise all these other bits, and they're just as hard. And that's where I think things need to move to, because otherwise what you're seeing is people get into these internal companies and then they start running rampant. Another really good example, if you saw Kinetic USA. Kinetic are a defense company, and their US arm, there was a release about, it was Bloomberg put it out, and they basically talked about what happened to them. They'd been compromised, they reckon, for 5 years solid by attackers. These guys had been running around their systems, doing whatever they wanted. And there was emails going around saying, yeah, everything you have of value is gone. So they didn't write in this kind of principle, I reckon. I'm pretty sure they looked like that. And the attackers got in, and once they got in, it was very hard to ship them back out again. So things need to end up more like that. And a tale of two companies. So the rest of this, really, I want to talk about specific things you can think about doing. But I also have to recognize with this stuff that not everyone's got the same kind of risk profile. Not everyone's doing stuff with banks. Not everyone's doing stuff with legal documents. Some people still have to run systems, but they don't have, and also not everyone's got a great budget, realistically speaking. So what I wanted to do is kind of take this and say we've got a tale of two companies. We've got our low risk, low budget system, and then we've got, if you're doing kind of high value stuff, then I would kind of call it high risk. And there's more like a spectrum. That's a bit artificial, but otherwise I'd be here a really long time with very complex graphs. And what I wanted to do was actually kind of say, okay, let's look at a kind of sample network. And this is, at the moment, it kind of looks warm, smarty-like. So we've got our external firewall that everyone's got, and behind that we've got a couple of load balancers, some web servers, and some database servers. So it could be a typical web application. But at the moment, it kind of looks a bit, once you get past that firewall, it's probably all good. So there's a stack of things to talk about. This is either going to run under if I talk really quickly, or it's going to run hideously over. So let's find out which way I end up doing this. Start off with the network. So ultimately, everything comes down to networking. Any system you've got connects to a network, and that's how they communicate. There's a couple of things that I don't see a lot when I do reviews that I think could help. And the first one is egress filtering. So the way that most people run their networks, obviously I'll kind of step back a little bit. Basically every system, or these days, tend to have a network firewall. What does a network firewall do? Well, it basically makes a series of decisions as a set of rules, which says allow traffic in or out based on these rules. And it just basically walks all the way through those. When it hits a matching rule, it generally stops and says, I'm now going to do whatever that one said. Now, most people, when they're writing their rules, they do, if it's not explicitly allowed on the way in, don't allow it. So I'm only going to open up my web ports, and then I'll stop everything else. And that's good. That's at least principle. That's a great security practice. However, what I tend to see in the reverse is that doesn't happen for stuff that starts from the inside. So traffic coming from the inside going out tends to be just allow it. And that's a problem from a security perspective. Now, a lot of people say to me, Rory, why does it really matter? Because once the hacker's in, surely it's all over. But what you tend to see is, say you've got a web application hack, so something like SQL injection, where someone's got access to execute commands, but only a very limited amount of access, so they can only do like one or two things. The very first thing they will do is make a connection back out to a server they control to download tools. That's like the first action you take. At the moment, in that kind of setup, if you've got that principle where anything can come out, it works. So they get onto the box, they get ability to execute commands in a limited way, and they're going to connect back to their server on the internet, drag down all the tools, and start the real business of doing whatever it is they're trying to do. If you block all the traffic outbound, then that turns out to be a lot harder. It doesn't stop them completely, but it'll slow them down. And if they're not really, really after you, so maybe there's this random noise I was talking about, then actually they might just stop at that point and move on to the next guy, because the next guy might not have got this set up, and they'll just carry on. So if you do it when you set the system up, isn't too hard. I'll kind of, as a word of warning, trying to reverse engineer firewalls can be nasty because it's sometimes hard to work out what traffic's meant to go across them. But really, setting up egress filtering, for my money, cheap, fairly easy, definitely worth it. So let's say you're actually spending a lot of money. Say I don't know, you have a system that you really rely on and it does a lot of transactions. There's more to it than that at network level. I'd argue network segmentation. Again, I don't see this very often. Security zones, splitting stuff up. If you split stuff up, again, you make their life harder. When I do security reviews, if I start on an internal network, I tend to find something I can compromise somewhere if I'm completely unrestricted. Because there's always a system somewhere that didn't get patched, that got left with default credentials, got left with a test system. Test and dev systems are classic. They tend to be on the same network. They don't always tend to be segregated. And realistically speaking, they're not a priority for patching. So if there's no internal segregation, you wander around until you find your system, you compromise that, and then you try and move on. Internal segmentation can make that harder. So if you say this load balancer only needs to talk to these web servers on port 80 maybe, or 443 maybe, depending on how you got it set up. These web servers only need to talk to the database server on port 1521 if it's MySQL, or whatever other. You can make it that much harder. You can reduce the attacker's ability to just wander around your network willy-nilly. The reason I put that in the high budget section is because it's not easy. It makes your life a lot more difficult. You have to put a lot more thought into how am I going to administer these servers, how am I going to set them up and configure them. So it's less something you would just put in as an afterthought. But if you're doing something which is worth a lot of money to you, again, this will slow attackers down. And also you can do things like logging on the firewalls and actually detect them. Because I'm going to talk about this is the next bit I was going to talk about, is when I look at security and I look at how people do things, it's almost all preventative controls. So if you use the old security, the hoary old analogy of the castle, the firewalls are like the wall, right? It's like the perimeter wall that people have to climb over to get in. And intrusion detection is like the guy watching you climbing the wall and going, hang on, you're not meant to be climbing that wall, stop it. And bizarrely, when I do my work, I rarely see this stuff. I rarely run into it, which surprises me, because I will say, you have to tell me, if I'm testing something, tell us the IDS is there so we know, that it's going to happen. But it doesn't happen very often. So what is, I'm using lots of acronyms, I should explain them all. Network IDS. Network IDS, kind of like all these things, is just a rule system. It looks at some data, has a series of decisions it makes based on the data, and then takes an action. Fairly straightforward. What this does is it looks at network traffic. It says, this looks like bad traffic to me. I'm going to alert you. I'm going to send you an email. I'm going to do a pop-up alert. I'm going to send an SMS, a variety of actions. And you just kind of, at its most basic level, you plank your little IDS up here. You say you're terminating SSL here. So this is all clear text traffic. Very important point that I've seen people get wrong before is they actually put that there and then they have encrypted traffic here. And all the IDS says is, look, it's encrypted, more encrypted. And I've actually seen that in commercial, and it really surprised me. But anyway, so you don't put it where you can only see encrypted traffic. But put it there, and you can get open source tools for this stuff. So Snort, there's a distribution called Security Onion, which is Snort plus a whole lot of analysis tools. And if you do nothing else, sit an IDS sensor on your network and have it sit there and don't even look at it. It will generate a lot of false positives. They always do. But what you can use it for is if you do get broken into, and I'm disappointed to say these days, if you run a big system, you probably will get broken into sooner or later. This gives you some idea of what they did and where they went. I remember I was involved in a breach, and the kind of follow-up from it was a horrible, horrible mess. But the investigator said the one thing that saved them was there was a web application firewall on the web server that got compromised. It wasn't switched on to block, but it was switched on to listen, and it told them what the attackers had done and where they'd gone, which made their life massively easy. Because otherwise you don't know where the attacker's gone. He could have gone anywhere. Could have compromised any system in the environment, which makes it very hard to clean up. So you could just put that on there, sit it there, and ignore it. If you've got time, then absolutely spend some time tuning it. These things work best when they're tuned, but that takes time and effort. I'm not going to lie and say that's easy. Not always. And if you've got big high-end system, consider intrusion prevention. This is basically the exact same thing as intrusion detection, except instead of just sending you an alert, it actually blocks the traffic. So the problem with that is you've got to get it right. If you've got a network intrusion prevention system and it misclassifies traffic, it'll block it. And so your application suddenly stops working, which is rarely good. So really, with this sort of system, what you need to do is you need to have really good communication. So this actually sits in line. It sits here, and it has to go through there. And you need to have really good communication with whoever's managing that and the people running the application. Because if you don't, what will happen is it'll start blocking traffic. People will say, it's that thing, turn it off. That's generally what happens to these systems. And one of the things you tend to see with security products like this is they'll get outsourced. So you get an outsourced company in because they're the experts in it. True, but make sure they know how to communicate with the rest of the people in the company, because otherwise, there's no good communication. They just get switched off. That's generally what happens. Or never get switched on. I've seen these things put in place in detection mode and they never ever get switched on because, no one wants to risk blocking something. And the other thing is, obviously, there's a risk there. You've got one of these. If it breaks, it takes out your network. So, what's up from IDS? What's up from network? Server. Kind of obvious. So, there's two things I wanted to mention about server, again in the low risk, kind of low budget category. One is HIDS. If anyone's heard or uses OSSEC or Tripwire, these are products that basically sit on your server, and what they'll do is they will look for changes, and they'll alert you when things change. So they'll alert you when packages get installed, they'll alert you when login attempts fail, they'll alert you when things happen. Again, they get sent to email or wherever else you want to configure them. If you do nothing else, I run one of these on my server. I've got a little web server. It doesn't have anything really high risk on it. If it all went horribly wrong, I would just blow it away and build it back up again. It's on a separate network. But I still run HIDS, because if someone broke in, it would tell me. It would say, hey, someone just replaced bin ls well, why would they replace BinLS? So the answer to that is that's the second thing an attacker does. Once he downloads the attack tools, the second thing he does is he puts a rootkit on the box. So he tries to hide himself because he wants to maintain access. The longer he has access, the more bad things he can do. And the first thing you do is replace a whole lot of system utilities so you can hide. And BinLS is a classic one because you don't want it, when one goes LS, essentially, it'll list everything but his tools. And there's classic rootkit techniques, things like that. But HIDs might spot those. HIDs might alert you, and HIDs might allow you to react quickly. And hardening. Generic system hardening, it's kind of a shame, Linux stuff anyway. There used to be things like Bastille Linux, hardened Ubuntu, things like that, but none of them seem dreadfully active at the moment. But hardening your system and taking stuff off production servers is an absolutely great way to make an attacker's life harder, make it more difficult for him. Classic thing is when you've got command execution, you will run wget to go and get your tools. So I'll say wget my tools down to the box so I can use them. Wget isn't on the box, that won't work. If curl isn't on the box, that won't work. If you get rid of enough system utilities, maybe you don't need them for actually running your application, you make the attacker's life way more difficult. And the other thing is, while he's doing all this stuff, like he's trying wget, oh, that didn't work. He's trying curl, that didn't work. That's all going into logs, which is hopefully alerting you. And if you've got a high-value system, the more you make him do, the more you make him run around trying to find things, the harder you make him work, the more chance you've got of actually finding him before he's done the bad thing, before he's actually compromised the database you actually care about. On the high end, you get really high-value systems. Mac. Mac is mandatory access control. So SE Linux, if anyone's encountered it, it's usually only to say disabled in the configuration file. Because it is a pain. I won't deny that. I've done it myself. You install. So what this does, mandatory access control systems essentially can impose a profile of allowed behavior on a process. So they can say, no matter what the file permissions are, this web server process is only allowed to do these things and nothing else. So essentially, so it means if someone goes chmod 777*, Mac system they still won't be able to do it. So you can see the downside to those systems instantly. It makes it harder to administer your system. You've got to know exactly what the process is going to do, how it works, what it does, what it shouldn't do. But hacker's life's way more difficult if Mac's on the box because you might not be able to. You could say, well, again, does the Apache service need to be able to run wget? Probably not. Okay, don't let it. Great, excellent, Mac profile. But I'm not going to lie and say that's easy. So that's why it's in the high budget land. Because again, lots of configuration time. A lot of these products are free. All these products, you can get free versions of them. So it's not the cost of actually buying the software. It's the cost of configuring it that takes the money. And WAFs. So web application firewalls. Mod security would be the classic one for free stuff. Mods, what these do essentially is they sit on the web server and they do just what IDS did and just what IPS did, except at a web server context. They see traffic come in. They have a rule base that they think this is bad, this is good, and they say, that's bad, do something, that's good, let it go. Problem is, they don't know anything about your application. They don't know how your application works. They don't know what it does for a living, so they get things wrong quite a bit. I had a good example. I put mod security on my web server, and it started blocking me posting to my blog. And the problem was I'd put a cross-site scripting string into my blog, because I was talking about it. And it said, oh, cross-site scripting string, block. So it doesn't understand anything about your application, so it will get things wrong. So that's why it's in the high bucket, because it needs tuning and it blocks stuff. So you probably want to be careful before don't just put a WAF on and let it run, because bad things will happen. Or just put it on in monitoring mode. That's probably a better way of doing it. So now we're getting up into more into code. I actually talk about framework. So when I'm talking about framework, I'm talking about Rails, if Rails is your framework of choice, or whatever else it would be, or modules, so gems you use. And the absolute basic thing I would absolutely recommend if you're running this stuff in production is monitor the mailing lists that talk about security. So you don't want to find Hacker News does not want to be your alerting mechanism. You should be on the mailing lists for this stuff. So when something comes out, you actually have the best chance. Because what you'll find is that hackers monitor this stuff. Various attackers of various type. I kind of call them, hackers is a weird word now because it means everything from the Chinese military to the American military to commercial hackers wherever they may be to hacktivists wherever they may be. It's a huge spectrum of people. Someone is monitoring that, and someone might have the motivation to put together a worm to attack systems based on it. So as soon as the breach gets notified, that's their trigger for starting writing an exploit. And these guys can turn it around in a day or two, sometimes. So if you're running a very high value system, that's, not a big window these days, necessarily. Reviews. I put a big question mark next to this because I'd be interested to hear anyone's thoughts on it, to be honest with you. If you run a big company and you run your system on a framework or product that's open source, you might consider sponsoring a security review of it or getting together with other companies and sponsoring a security review of it. I'm not aware of these having happened. They may already be happening. If not, they should be, in my opinion anyway. If people are writing companies and run their company on a product, and their company is worth, I don't know, £50 million, spending money on a security review on your key products is probably a good plan. Some people might say, that's a good argument, Rory, for using commercial software, because surely they do that because it's commercial. Yeah, I wouldn't assume that. Some of the worst security I've ever seen has been very, very expensive commercial products, really, really bad. And even products with like really long lists of customers that sound like they'd be the sort of people who'd get reviews done. Doesn't always happen. You really cannot assume that commercial software means. So I actually prefer open source in that regard because you could do a security review. If it's valuable enough to you, it actually may be worth doing it. Whereas with commercial software, in a lot of cases, you've got no chance of getting the source. And unless you're a big customer, you might not even be able to say to them, you do a security review and tell me the result. If you're a big enough customer, if you're a big customer, then absolutely do that. Get your commercial providers and say, right, you, tell me what you do. Give me some details. So at this point, I wanted to have a brief aside from the stack of things to talk about cloud. I'm guessing that a fair number of percentage of people in here deploy to cloud these days. Pretty much everyone does. If you look at all the stuff I've been talking about, depending on who your cloud provider is, you might not be able to do a lot of this stuff. So say, for example, you deploy to Heroku. Well, you don't have access to the operating system, so you're not rolling out a Mac system. You're not rolling out IDS. You're not rolling out Egress Filtering on your firewall because that's all hidden from you by them. Now, that's good and bad. On the one hand, it's good because someone else is presumably looking at this stuff. On the other hand, it could be bad because they may not be doing as much as you're expecting, whoever your provider is. So another thing is, if you're rolling out commercial products onto a cloud provider, really grill them on this stuff. More detail than we use SSL and therefore trust us. Because if anyone's been to a website and seen the words we use SSL, trust us, that does not inspire faith with me anyway, because I think everyone says that. I actually used an analogy about it. I reckon that if people say we use military-grade SSL, which is not an uncommon phrase, it's like saying trust our bank because the rivets are the same ones as in battleships. So depending on your cloud provider, if you're using AWS, if you're down at that kind of level, you've got a lot more visibility. You can do things like have virtual networks. You can do IDS sensors. You can do a lot more of it. If you're using platform as a service, you have to basically trust your cloud provider to some degree or another. But I would grill them on it. Absolutely ask them about it. Because one of the other things I saw about the Linode hack is a lot of people said, oh, I'm moving providers. I'm off. I'm not going to trust these Linode guys. And people said, where are you going? And they'd give all these company names. But no time did they actually say how they could trust them any more than Linode. How do you know when you move to the next guy that he's any better? He could be considerably worse. I don't know the details either way. But I would suggest that without good proof, you've got no real reason to move because you've no idea that the next guy's any better. So let's talk about your own code. So your own code obviously sits on top of all this large stack of things. But it's still relevant, and it's still things you can do to try and harden it down. If you're in the low risk budget, there are tools you can run that are free. If you're not running Brakeman on your code, I would thoroughly recommend at the very least looking at it. Brakeman will not solve all your problems. It will not make your application magically secure, but it will help you catch certain classes of bug. If you're interested in the details, my talk, I think it was last year, was about black box, white box testing tools and that kind of what they can and can't do for you. It's worth knowing what they can't do for you, but absolutely it's free, therefore great. It's amazing that they've actually brought that out for free. Generally, static analysis tools are hideously expensive. If you look at the commercial options, 10 grand up to over 100 grand to get started with one of the commercial options. So the fact that Brakeman do their stuff for free is just amazing. There are also black box scanners, so web app scanners, things like that. And if what you're worried about is the random noise of the internet, then it could be enough to say I'm going to run a black box scanner across, because that's what the bad guys are doing. So you do something similar, run a black box scanner. If you're the high risk, a concept I would thoroughly recommend looking into. You've noticed when I've been talking about all the different intrusion detection systems, so network intrusion detection, WAF, all these things have got false positives because they don't understand your application. The only place where your application is visible as logic is, surprise, surprise, in your application. I've never seen this deployed in an app. I've actually seen a couple of kind of basic examples of it. If your application detects someone doing something bad, do something about it. You've got logs. Information is logged to. So if, for example, someone starts requesting every customer ID from 1 up to 10,000, it's a fair bet that unless they're an administrator, that's a malicious activity. You could kick them out. You could log them off. That'll annoy them. It'll slow automated scanners down quite a bit. You could block their IP address, communicate with the firewall, block them altogether. You could take a variety of actions. You could say, hey, that account's been compromised. I better tell the user. There's a good project called OWASP App Sensor. It's not like it hasn't got a whole lot of detail in terms of, it hasn't actually got implementation, but they've got an idea of, here are the sensor points, here's things you could look for, and here's actions you could consider taking. And it's well worth thinking about, could I implement some of these into my code? If you, again, high risk, it's worth thinking, can I implement this stuff into my application to actually, again, make the attackers more difficult, life more difficult, make it harder for them. If you're not a real target, if you're just one of 1,000, they'll move on to the next guy. If you are a real target, at least you'll know they're after you. Because if someone keeps going after you, after getting blocked, after getting logged out, after blocking their IP address, if they still come back, they really want to get you. And that's very valuable information, because you might be able to do something more serious, or at least someone's after you. Because the funny thing is, before I go to the next bit, there's a thing called the Verizon do this thing called the Data Breach Investigation Report, and they look at breaches. They basically clean up after breaches. And they said that in most cases, I think it was something like 60-odd% of cases, it's a third party that tells the company they've been breached. So a third party notices something like, for example, credit cards that company owns have been misused. And they're the ones telling the companies they've been broken into. That's not great. So on the policy side, incident response. You're going to get broken into if you run a big app on the internet for long enough. You should have a policy about what you're going to do when that happens. If that is just a list of people to call, messages to put on your site, things to think about, are you going to get forensics? Do you know a forensics company? Who do you have to notify? What are the legal requirements in your jurisdiction for people you have to tell? There's more of these coming along, so it's well worth having that. It doesn't take a huge amount of time, but it's just so that when it all goes horribly wrong, it's a horrible scene. I've seen a couple of these, and there's a lot of panic and people running around and saying, oh, what do we do? And anything you can do in advance to actually give that a bit of thought, I think, will make your life easier. More incident response. If you're a big company, practice this stuff. Actually break things. I think it was Netflix that's got, is it Chaos Monkey, that goes around breaking bits of their system? Breach Monkey. Get someone in, have them break one of your systems, then work from there, and see how long it takes for people to detect it, and how easily they can kick the guy out when they find it. And then, can they tell you what he did? Because if these things aren't true, then that's what's going to happen when a real breach happens. You're going to have people running around going, what did this guy do? How did he get in? This is, again, you're talking high-risk, high-value systems. I've seen a situation where the forensic investigators went along to Best Buy and brought every single removable hard disk that they had in the shop, took them back and started imaging every single server because they didn't know where they'd gone. So they had to assume they'd gone everywhere. And that's a really bad, that's not a place you want to be because that's not fun. Last, users. At the top of all this, we have users. We have administrative users, we have people that operate the systems, and we've got users of the application. The biggest problem is passwords. Still the biggest problem, has been for years, still is. There's another company that, actually no, it was Verizon again, that were talking about the causes of breaches. They actually look at what caused the breach. Was it malware? Was it hacking? What happened? And it was credential reuse. I think it was only 50-odd% of cases. They got a copy of the credentials, they reused them, that's how they broke into the system. People use the same passwords. Unless you're really unusual, you cannot remember more than about, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 discrete, unique, strong passwords. So people reuse them. What I do is use a password safe, and that's what I'd recommend other people do. Get a password safe, use the password safe. Have a very strong password on the password safe. Don't use the same password everywhere, because credential reuse will get you. If you take out one system and then that password is then used everywhere, that's it, game over. If I can get one laptop, put a bit of malware on it, and then someone types in a password that's a generic password for your entire system, it's pretty much game over. Another one, GitHub accounts. If you keep all your code in GitHub, and you probably do, that's username and password, and it's on the internet, so it's exposed. If someone gets your GitHub password, would they be able to push a commit without being noticed? Probably, hopefully not. Hopefully people code review every commit that goes in, but maybe not. In fact, push code into your repository. One line would do it. So passwords are definitely a weak point, a serious weak point. And that's why if you high-end, high-risk, two-factor. Google actually put something on paper recently. They said that in the future, they reckon everyone on their systems will be using two-factor. I agree, because it's the only good way to stop this stuff. Keystroke loggers are endemic. Malware is endemic. You're not going to get rid of this stuff. Two-factor is not, but it's not a panacea. It won't fix everything, but it will, again, make life that little bit harder for the attackers. So I went through all these, and every single thing I put up there costs money. None of it's free. So I thought, well, how do you get budget for all this? And unfortunately, I'd love to say I had a really great slide that just said, here's how. Take this, give it to the director, and he will give you all the budget you need, but I didn't. So So the good way is convince the budget holder this stuff's important. Things are changing on the internet. The amount of investment people are putting into security 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I'd argue is not even close to being enough to handle today's environment for two reasons. One, more things are out there. People put more and more things on the internet. You can look at government. 10, 15 years ago, if you wanted to do most government transactions, it was bits of paper sent in the mail. These days, it's almost always websites. So you'd really hope that their level of investment in security is, not even close to where it was 10, 15 years ago. But getting more budget can be hard. So the bad way, have a breach. There's a company called White Hat Security. They did a survey of their customers. Their customers get their services, which is like a periodic review of their websites. And they go around doing this. They asked their customers, they said, what is it that improves your, why is it that you got better this year? And they had all these different things like, security training or implementing scanning tools or anything like that. And the best one was companies got breached. So once you've been breached, it's amazing how easy it is to get budget because no one wants to go through that pain again. And I've seen this. When Sony got hacked into 2 years ago, like Sony got hacked into 40 odd times in quick succession, a load of companies said, could this happen to us? Could we be the next Sony? And budget, appeared for a while. It went away again, unfortunately, because the thing about breaches is they only last for a while. The awareness and the notification, it'll give you like 6 weeks. So get your business case in right then and get them to sign the check. Because in a couple of weeks, something else will come along. The senior execs will no longer be that focused and they'll move on. So get it in, wait for a breach, get your business case, put it in. And the future way, regulation. I hate to say this, I really do, but I'm fairly sure it's coming. If you come back in 5 years' time, there will be some kind of legislation that says minimum level of security for internet-connected systems. And the reason I say that is because voluntary methods are obviously not working. I mean, you can look at the volume of breaches. I mean, I don't think you could easily go a week these days without getting some breach story somewhere. And you're looking at the level of investment being put into hacking stuff by, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, government, which doesn't help. So sooner or later, someone's going to come up with regulation. In Europe, it's probably going to be data protection. I would have thought the next version of data protection regulations are going to start saying things like, when we said Principle 7, which is have good security, what we meant was this, and this. Like PCI. So if you've been through the pain of PCI, the reason I say it's bad is because it's a really big, blunt hammer. They're going to come along and go, doof, and it's going to be horrible. Unless, of course, you're a person who sells security software, which is quite good. So that is, unfortunately, the only three I came up with. If anyone's got any other ideas how you get budget for this stuff, happy to hear it. Questions? Not too bad.
I find outbound firewall rules pretty hard to set up. Do you have any good advice for setting up a simple outbound firewall?
So it tends to be, the only way really to design firewall rules, and it's one of the things you end up having to, it's how well you can know your network. The problem is, in certain environments, like if you've got a web server, it probably only needs to go and get app updates. So when I'm talking about firewall rules, I'm not talking about it responding to requests that come in. It's talking about stuff it initiates. It probably only needs to go and get updates from other servers. But the only really way of doing it is profiling each service on the box and saying, what does this do? What you could do is put a logging rule down. Put that logging rule down for a while, in case something's like a periodic transaction only happens once every couple of months. And then at the end of a period, analyze the logging rule and say, what can we generalize a rule from what it did? In reality, these days, I suppose HTTP, HTTPS, for things like updates, is all over HTTP, HTTPS. The problem is, if you allow even one port out to all IP addresses, that's pretty much game over because the attackers will work that one out quite quickly and just host their attacking server. They want to get stuff off on that port. So you have to try and narrow it down to specific destinations. So if you've got Ubuntu or Debian, obviously it's things like patch servers for those. So there's no really great answer for that. It really would be, if you've got an existing system, run logging. So put logging on the firewall for outbound traffic. Wait for a while, look and see what you've got there, and then analyze that and reverse engineer the rules from it. It takes a while, but it does work.
So you mentioned about cloud stuff, and obviously you said you've got to trust them and to an extent,
Yeah.
and you've got to grill them. But beyond that, what can you do yourself to mitigate these risks?
So if you're on cloud, you can ask to test your application on their cloud. So most cloud providers will have a concept of allowing you to test. So Amazon, for example, have a sign-off. You just have to say, I'm going to test, but you can only test your bit of it. And this is the real problem: is you can, the other thing you can do. So you can test your bit, but you say my application stack, great, I can test that, and get an external company or do it yourself. Beyond that, the only thing you can really do is look for certifications, and that's not a great mechanism. But for example, if a company's got ISO 27001, they've at least thought about some of the problems. They may not have all the answers, but they're going to be in potentially a better place. You can ask the general question, but unfortunately, in my experience, unless you're a really big customer, you'll get a very general response. We do good stuff, trust us. So yeah, testing your own systems plus certifications would be the two ways that I could think of that would really kind of, and that's, yeah, not a brilliant answer, but that's pretty much the way it goes. I would say passwords, getting the handle on the password problem, because that's how most people get broken into. Locking down administrative interfaces, don't leave those lying around the internet for people to attack, because that's how people get in. So things like SSH, RDP, anything like that would be, you can lock those down by source IP address is a good example. So most times you've got administrative interface, you probably only need people even from one country, even if you can lock it down to just the UK. Better if you can do specific IP addresses. If everyone's got static IPs, that's great. Otherwise, maybe just an ISP or a country, but lock it down. It just stops the random noise, and that's pretty cheap. That's just, you know, some better changes to the firewall. So that sort of stuff, probably password management and administrative access management would be the two I'd look at first.
Obviously, you talked about some general stuff there. Is there anything from a Rails point of view that that it does well, that it's doing badly, that you need to be aware of?
Rails is pretty good in that it does quite a few things for you, and that's only getting more. And I think because of the problems they had, they've gone to secure defaults more. So things like mass assignment, which used to be a problem by default, they tend to flick over to the reverse, which is secure by default, and you have to actively make it insecure. The thing that Rails and no framework will ever help you with really is authorization flaws. So they can handle authentication, they can handle input validation to an extent, but authorization is an application-specific problem. So that's the one that, when I'm reviewing a framework-based app, I tend to always expect to find problems there, because it's the one thing that the framework can't handle.